We're now going to look at part two of Who Studies Animals and Why. And we're going to be focusing on ecologists. Let's look at some examples here. So here we have, right in the middle of this picture, a hot chili pepper. What makes chili peppers hot? A chemical substance that's found in them called capsaicin. And of course, atop the chili pepper, we have a mouse. Let's look at what happens when we're dealing with capsaicin that's found in chili peppers and mammals versus birds. It turns out that they're differentially affected. Basically, birds are not affected in terms of sensing any kind of pain from capsaicin in hot chili peppers, whereas mammals are affected by capsaicin in a negative way. So, why is that the case? Well, it turns out if we look at mammals, there are pain receptors for capsaicin. So if you're eating the chili peppers, then you're going to be getting capsaicin introduced into your system that will lock into these pain receptors, causing pain. Makes sense. Birds, on the other hand, lack those pain receptors. But capsaicin has a different kind of effect when ingested by birds. It actually acts as a laxative. So now there's going to be an awful lot of bird poop. Now, in terms of the bird poop in relationship to the chili peppers, that's a good thing for the chili peppers because contained within the bird poop are seeds from the chili peppers. So the birds are going to be spreading more seeds around, therefore you're going to have even more chili peppers. So the chili pepper plants are benefiting, the birds remain unharmed. In other words, we're looking at an ecosystem, and ecosystems can sometimes be in good balance or sometimes get totally out of balance, totally out of whack. And that's the kind of thing that ecologists are especially concerned about and why they're interested in animal behavior. So let's look at this example. This is a group of islands called the Paracel Islands. They're also known as the Xisha Islands, and they are located south of China and to the east of Vietnam. They are rich in guano. Guano is basically a lot of bird poop, and it serves as an excellent fertilizer. It's harvested as a fertilizer. Well, both the Chinese and the Vietnamese had their eyes set on trying to harvest the guano on the Paracel Islands. But the Chinese got there first, so they actually stationed some military troops on the island so that they could make sure that they had pretty much exclusive access to harvesting all of the guano. So they brought in troops. Okay, now the troops are coming over from the mainland, and they started to miss some of the diet that they were eating on the mainland. So what they did was to requisition from the mainland chickens because they wanted especially to be eating eggs. So that's fine. The chickens are laying a lot of eggs. Great. Unfortunately, there were large predatory rats all over the island that started to eat not only the eggs, but also the chickens for that matter. So as a result of that, they decided to requisition cats because the rat population got way out of control. So now they're bringing in cats to try to get rid of the rats. Turns out that the rats were so fierce that they kind of stood their ground. And the cats decided, okay, we're not going to pursue the rats. What are we going to get? They started to get the native birds on the island. So that wasn't a good thing. So now we have a cat problem. So now they decided to bring in from the mainland dogs to get rid of the cats. Well, that did not work very well at all. So I think they stopped at that point. Dogs were sent in to discourage the cats who were chasing the birds instead of the rats, who were killing the chickens that laid the eggs that the soldiers wanted for dinner. A total mess, and at that point, it was kind of a hopeless situation. The best thing that could have happened maybe was that the island just sinks below the water. That did not happen, however. So, but it shows you what happens if you introduce an animal innocently to an area where they're typically not found, and then everything just gets out of balance. Here's another situation. This is pretty awful, actually, and it happened quite by accident. These brown tree snakes were not introduced by humans. They sort of were brought aboard ships quite accidentally. They made their way into cargo. This happened during the Second World War. So the brown tree snakes were native to New Guinea, and they somehow, as stowaways, got on ships from New Guinea to Micronesia, from Micronesia to Guam, and they had never been found on either Micronesia or Guam prior to this time. But Guam turned out to be where the nightmare actually started to occur. Because what happened was they were having they discovered they had more than 2 million of these creatures on Guam, where none had existed before. And basically, it's the highest density on our planet of brown tree snakes, pretty much to this day. They continue to be a pest, and they basically decimated the native population of lizards and birds. Bird eggs, of course, were also being eaten by the brown tree snakes, thus fewer birds. And so there's been a lot of concern about how we're going to deal with these brown tree snakes. 9 of the 11 native bird species have actually already become extinct.
This is the small island of Guam that, during the Second World War, became a major military base. Sometime in the 1940s, brown tree snakes from New Guinea appeared here, brought accidentally by ships. Tree snakes hunt birds, and Guam's white eyes, flycatchers and fantails, having no experience of predators, had no defense against them. Today, Guam is an island without birds. Species that evolved here and differed from any elsewhere have now gone for good. Insects and spiders, without birds to keep their numbers in check, have proliferated, and the forests have fallen totally silent.
I don't think that there are absolutely no birds left on Guam, but certainly the population has gone down considerably, and as a result of that, the insect population, the spider population, has grown considerably. So, one thing happens and then everything else starts to snowball. Additional to all that, there were hundreds of power outages caused by the brown tree snakes almost on a nightly basis, which was driving the people who live there absolutely crazy. And so now they have that problem. What was happening was the brown tree snakes were climbing up the telephone poles. They would actually get up on guide wires that kind of secured the poles, make their way up the poles, got tangled up in the wires, and then caused all these power outages. So at that point, they decided to bring in a fairly well-known comparative psychologist who studied snakes in the United States. And he tried different things. One of the first things he tried, actually, turned out not to work all that well, but it was an obvious choice. He put these discs on the guide wires to see if they would just cause a barrier, but the snakes went around them. They just climbed over them, and the power outages persisted. So he gave it some more thought and decided that instead of just having the discs, he would capitalize on the fact that snakes kind of like dark places. And so he actually fashioned these cones, and he put those on the guide wires. And then there was a tube at the opposite end of the cone. So the snake goes into the cone, ends up at the back of the cone, going down the tube, ends up right back on the ground where it started. That helped somewhat. Again, this was by no means a panacea. Well, more recently, what's been tried, and something that has helped considerably, but has certainly not eliminated the problem, is to bait dead mice with acetaminophen, which is the active ingredient in Tylenol. Why? Acetaminophen is a toxin for snakes. So they're eating the mice, they're getting the acetaminophen, and they're dying. Again, not a panacea, but it's helped somewhat. Let's look at something that we can relate to a little bit more directly here in New England, Lyme disease. The risk of Lyme disease is actually a very complex interaction. Well, as you'll see, it's not all that complex, involving acorns, white-footed mice, gypsy moths, deer, and, of course, ticks. Here's the situation. So, when oak trees are doing really, really well, you'll have an increase in the acorn population. And these mice like to eat acorns. So they're going to be doing really well population-wise, so there'll be more mice around. Well, in addition to liking to eat acorns, these mice also like to eat gypsy moths. Now, gypsy moths typically will damage oak trees, but now there's going to be fewer gypsy moths because the mice are eating them. So therefore, there's going to be less oak tree damage, and therefore, more acorns. We just go around and around and around. Oh, and by the way, don't forget about those deer. Deer also like to eat acorns. So the deer population is going to go up. And don't forget about those ticks. The tick population is going to go up because they're found both on deer as well as on the mice. So as a result of having more ticks, there's going to be an increase in, guess what? Lyme disease. So, interestingly, it turns out that if you had more defoliation by gypsy moths, you would have less of a risk of Lyme disease because it all goes back to the acorns. There'd be less acorns. But that's not the situation when oak trees are doing really, really well and you have increased acorn production, because you're then going to have an increase in the incidence of Lyme disease. Let's look at something else that's a bit timely, West Nile virus. West Nile virus has actually greatly affected a lot of bird populations. Here we're looking at chickadees, and you can see when West Nile virus was introduced into North America, not intentionally, of course, we start to see a decline in the chickadee population. And in fact, not only chickadees, but many species as well. You can see the significant drop in the American crow population once West Nile virus was introduced here. And if we look at it state by state, just some typical regions, you can see that it goes down. The crow population goes down in Oregon, goes way down in Illinois. In the Northeast, where we live, it goes down considerably. Colorado. Everywhere you look, it's actually going down. And the same with invasive species. That can cause all kinds of problems in terms of ecosystems.
One of the biggest threats to endangered species isn't poaching or pollution or climate change. It's other animals. Just look at the Asian carp, an invasive species that have been threatening the U.S. for years. The carp were imported by Midwestern fish farmers in the 1970s, but eventually escaped due to flooding. The fish, which can grow as large as 110 pounds and have a habit of leaping out of the water like silver missiles when they're threatened, are voracious eaters. U.S. officials were so worried that the carp would make their way all the way up the Mississippi River into the Great Lakes ecosystem that the White House named a carp czar in 2010 and has since spent hundreds of millions of dollars trying to defend the lakes. But those efforts may be for naught. A new study found out last month that a number of grass carp, a subspecies of Asian carp, seem to have established themselves in a river that leads directly into the Great Lakes, which means they could be setting up the stage to breed for years. Then there's a lionfish, a spindly tipped species that has wreaked havoc in the Atlantic since it was accidentally introduced during Hurricane Andrew back in 1992. The lionfish is a rapid breeder and an indiscriminate hunter, consuming more than 40 species, including valuable commercial ones like the grouper. Like many invasive species, they're especially dangerous because native species have no innate fear of them until it's too late. On land, Burmese pythons, often released accidentally as pets by their owners, have begun to menace the Florida Everglades. The pythons can grow to nearly 20 feet and can take down everything from bobcats to small alligators. A 2012 study of the Everglades found a drastic reduction in the number of small mammals that tend to make up the diet of the python. a sign that the snakes are beginning to have a major impact on one of the most important ecosystems in the United States. Given the threat from invasive species, it's not surprising that governments spend billions of dollars a year trying to deal with them. But the problem is getting worse. Climate change is mixing up habitats, moving animals from one part of the world to another, while growing international trade can shift species across the globe. The fight against invasive species has long been a losing battle, and that's even led some scientists to say it's time to stop trying to fight. After all, a species that left its home in Africa millions of years ago and has since spread to every corner of the world should be a familiar one. It's human beings.
So invasive species can really cause all kinds of problems with ecosystems. And typically, it happens by accident or in some cases climate change. But it's something that once it happens, and those Asian carp, by the way, are an absolute nightmare. These aren't little goldfish, 110 pounds we're dealing with. I mean, cause damage with people when they're on their boats. Let's look at that in a little more detail because it's actually pretty amazing.
This is what happens when a particular population of fish in the Illinois River is startled.
Yeah, oh, right around back, behind the boat. Wow. Watch out, they're everywhere.
These are silver carp, the most notorious of the Asian carp family. Many believe the Illinois River has the densest population of silver carp in the nation.
That's kind of ground zero on this invasion.
Asian carp were introduced to the United States in the 1970s to control algae in catfish farms in the South. In the 1980s, floodwaters allowed the carp to escape and infest the Mississippi River basin.
When it comes to the river systems, if it's connected, if it's got a direct connection to the Mississippi or the Illinois River, it's going to have these fish in it.
Asian carp not only disrupt the food chain, push out native fish, are a nuisance to boaters, but they are also extremely dangerous.
Yeah, this is about an average size silver carp. This is one that can hurt you when it jumps. If your boat's going 20, 30 miles an hour and this guy hits you, it's going to leave a mark.
It was a flying silver carp that broke this woman's jaw as she participated in a sport created for the sole purpose of hunting this nuisance fish. Their population is growing at a rapid pace. The females can lay 2 million eggs a year, and they grow rapidly.
Once they get to a certain size, we don't have a predator that's capable of eating them, and they're just running unchecked.
So how do we get rid of them? Some say if you can't beat them, eat them. They believe that creating an appetite for silver carp will hold their population in check.
The vision about all this is to literally educate our people how to eat this fish.
But getting Americans to eat silver carp has been challenging.
People in this country just don't seem to want to pick around the bones. The biggest problem with these fish are that the fillets are filled with bones.
Now there is concern that Asian carp have a path out of the rivers and into the Great Lakes through the Chicago Sanitary and Ship Canal. So a multi-million-dollar electronic barrier has been constructed to potentially stop the migration.
With the barriers in place, we are effectively plugging the biggest hole for the movement of these fish. It would be very difficult for fish to just swim right through this waterway behind us.
So this is quite a nightmare, as you can see. They're actually dangerous. A woman broke her jaw. I would not want to be on a boat with those fish jumping around because they get all stirred up and, they're basically frightened by the motor and they just start jumping all over the place and it sort of gets to be a swarm. You get a couple of them doing that and then they're all going to be doing it. And without any discretion in terms of where they're jumping. Quite a problem. So that's sort of an introduction to what can happen when ecosystems get out of balance and why ecologists are certainly concerned about studying animal behavior in terms of finding out ways to not only prevent these things from happening, but when they do happen, figure out ways of solving the problem.